This episode of the Soul Method podcast is all about how to handle challenging conversations with grace and ease. If you're wanting to level up every relationship in your life and never feel resentment towards those you love again, stay tuned. In this episode of the Soul Method podcast, we do have some adult language. So if you have little ones around, grab your headphones now. Hi, this is Joelle Fawcett, and welcome to the Soul Method podcast.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic lights.
Hi, and welcome. I am so glad you're here. This is episode 6 of the Soul Method podcast, titled The Engagement of Your Life. The mission of the Soul Method is to be your guide, to heal from the past, be at peace in the present, and create a future you love. Like I said, my name is Joelle Fawcett, and I am the founder of the Soul Method. Coming off a holiday weekend, I was inspired to do an episode all about close family and friend relationships. Because, if we're honest, these often tend to be the most challenging relationships we have. As the old adage goes, we most often hurt the people we are closest to. This episode will also be in depth about the first part of step 3. This is of our 3-step process that I set up in the last 2 episodes. So, if you haven't listened to episode 4 or episode 5 yet, definitely pause here and go back. The information in this episode won't make much sense without listening to those episodes first. And, if you hadn't noticed, this 3-step process is 100% reflective of the mission of the Soul Method. Step 1 is deal with yourself, which I discussed in episode 4. Step 2 is use the banana experiment, which is episode 5. And now for the first part of step 3, which is to properly engage with others to banish resentment and foster healthy and deep relationships. The purpose of step 3 is twofold. First, to banish resentment in any of your relationships through proper engagement. When you use these skills, you no longer harbor frustration or irritation in your heart towards others because you're completely clean with them in the present. Second, it allows you to take your relationships to a completely new level and truly show up as a safe and loving space for the people in your life. You cannot lean in, say no authentically, or get curious about another person's state if you're not emotionally clean first. Like I've mentioned many times in the podcast before, the only way to get clean is to deal with your own emotional traumas and triggers. Now, after I've said this a bunch, I have had a handful of people say to me, "But I don't have emotional trauma," or "I don't get triggered." Which I usually say, okay, let me ask you some questions. When's the last time you yelled at a car in front of you because they were going too slow? When's the last time you had an attitude with your spouse or a coworker? When's the last time you had to leave a gathering of people because your own emotions were too big? And lastly, here's the kicker. When's the last time you ate chocolate, smoked a cigarette, drank coffee, or poured an alcoholic beverage to, quote-unquote, chill out from a stressful day at work? If you answer yes to any of these questions, you know because you're human, you're someone who either needs to process past emotional trauma or is in the state of continuing to process current events. I want to be really clear that no one, not even me, ever graduates from the continual process of dealing with themselves in the present. However, once you've released all the emotional baggage from the past, it becomes far easier to process through emotional resistance that comes up in day-to-day life. Why will this process never stop? Well, because we're alive and we are human. This process is continuing because our ego, or that tiny little voice in our heads, comes with being alive, like I discussed in episode 3. As long as we have our ego, it will want to defend our rightness, take everyone personally, and avoid responsibility. The process of emotionally dealing with ourselves is often the process of calming the ego and releasing anything it has dredged up so we can see current events from a place of peace and perspective. Now, this is all well and good, and it can appear very linear when you're just dealing with you. It becomes far more interesting and far less linear when you introduce other people. Here's the reality. Most of the people in our lives will not do this work. I dream of a day when these skills are taught in schools and family tribes are built of people who all have healthy and fulfilling lives. And I'm also very aware that even though life is so much better when these skills are practiced, few people will take it upon themselves to actually do it. Why? Well, I can only guess, but I gather that the average person finds it far more rewarding to binge on Netflix with a glass of wine after a long day at work, rather than challenging his or her own way of being. Being emotionally healthy is just like being physically healthy. Just because we know we feel better when we eat healthy foods and go to the gym doesn't mean it's easier in the moment to avoid the chocolate cake. Average people have average vision, which is usually about 20 seconds long or the attention span of a goldfish. In our Western society, we do not grow up in a culture that glorifies healthy relationships and personal responsibility. Actually, we grow up in a culture that glorifies exactly the opposite. For example, the hottest shows on Netflix aren't parading relationships where people are personally responsible for their own emotions. Instead, we watch movies where the guy ghosts the girl yells at the guy yells at the girl breaks down in tears, the guy is strong for her, and then they fall in love. And everyone talks about the show and says, "Ooh, I can't wait to find my person so I can feel like that." Has anyone besides me ever bothered to look at this and think, what the actual fuck? I don't know what you are calling love, but whatever the hell that is, not only is it not love, but I want no part of it. Most of us associate falling into love with falling into codependency, but that's a topic for a different episode. All of that being said, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to emotionally deal with yourself, whether it's using emotional freedom technique or tapping or another method that connects to the subconscious part of the brain. If you aren't willing to do this, I can promise you that you will not be able to live a truly peaceful and happy life. Okay, I know that's a really bold statement, so I'm going to say it again. You are not exempt. If you aren't willing to deal with yourself, you will never be able to live a truly peaceful and happy life. You may have glimmers of peace and happiness. We all do. But they will always be shadowed by the ego's anticipation of the next wrong thing that may or may not happen to you or someone you're in a relationship with. Until you deal with yourself, it is impossible to find true love, trust someone else, or create a future that you cannot wait to live. This is because until you deal with yourself, you cannot truly love yourself, trust yourself, or be at peace with your current life. All of these things start and end with you. Now, like I said, this process can feel very linear, like a graph with a line that goes straight from 0 to 10 very quickly until we introduce other people into the mix. Just like you, I have plenty of people in my life who are very committed to being exactly the way they are. That is, they constantly take things personally, they're addicted to drama, and they always want to be right in conversations, aka they have zero perspective on themselves. These are the people that step 3 is all about. When you master this, not only are you completely bulletproof to your own emotional trauma and triggers, but you also genuinely enjoy every relationship in your life because you're only creating them in a way that you're going to love. So, you know that annoying aunt you have, or that friend from high school who always wants to gossip with you when you're at the bar? How would you like to never dread their appearances or feel the need to avoid them again? The first part of this is identifying when you're not in a clean place. There's been several times in my healing journey where I think I've processed all the way through something, when in reality, there's more layers that I need to deal with. In my personal and coaching experience, this usually happens with our deepest core beliefs. Those tiny, mad ideas the ego planted in our belief systems at a young age. For example, about 1 year into my healing journey, I had processed through a lot of junk. At that point, I was in a place where I could lean into conversations with most of the people in my life, with very little impact on my own state of peace. Anytime I had trouble, I would call or text my coach, and with a little support, within about 15 minutes, I would have processed through whatever was going on for me. This applied to every relationship in my life, except that with my mom. Every time I was around my mom, I could feel my anxiety simmer to life under my calm appearance, and I constantly felt judged and defensive. So, these are all really good clues that you're not done, that you're not done unpacking emotional triggers and junk from the past. When you're interacting with someone and you start to take them personally or feel defensive, or even just find yourself saying in your head, "Oh my God, I wish they would just stop talking," that's your sign that there's more to deal with. On this topic, my coach has always reminded me, any place in our lives, our relationships, finances, career, children, etc., any place where there isn't abundance and ease of manifestation, there is always a core belief that needs to be dealt with. Yes, I mean any place. If you're not at peace in the present with your finances, your job, your relationship with your spouse, your friendships, it simply means that there is more work to do. On the story of how I processed through those emotions with my mom, I'm going to come back to that in a future episode. Often, mother and father wounds go deep, not because we have bad parents or that our parents intended to do us harm in any way. It simply has to do with the fact that as a child, we naturally are dependent on them for our most basic physical and emotional needs. In fact, it takes infants several months to realize cognitively that they aren't the same person as their mom. Because look at it from their point of view. After all, they spent the first few months of their existence literally inside their mom. How could life ever be different? This natural attachment is amazing and beautiful. And as we grow into childhood and then into our teenage years, the process of becoming our own selves naturally has many bumps along the road. Back to step 3. I encourage you to spend time both dealing with yourself and practicing the banana experiment before leaning into conversations. And when you do start leaning in and being curious and being authentic, give yourself permission to exit at any point. It's far better to leave a conversation than to emotionally explode out of defensiveness or anger and then need to apologize later. Has anyone been there before? You get so angry and ticked off in an argument, and then you wind up saying a lot of things that you don't really mean and wind up having to say sorry for a lot later. Don't create that situation for yourself. Exit first. This is what we will focus on for the rest of this episode: your authentic yes and your authentic no. These are the key factors in banishing resentment from your relationships. So, what does this look like? I gave an example in the last episode of a conversation I had with my friend Blake, and I'll actually use her for another one of my examples in a little bit. Now, in the last conversation I relayed, she was in a place to be personally responsible and receive feedback from me. The situation I'll share in this episode was completely different. And that's the thing. Unless you're in a relationship with somebody who is committed to not taking people personally and to dealing with themselves, you're going to have moments where someone is one way and in the next moment, they'll be in a completely different place. That's totally normal and totally okay. And that's why when you're entering a conversation, you must be able to say yes or no from an authentic place. Now, like I mentioned before, the purpose of step 3 has 2 parts. We are going to focus on the first one here. The second one we will tackle in the next episode. The first part of step 3 is to banish resentment from your relationships through proper engagement. Now, to understand this, we obviously must understand what engagement means. So I'm not talking about engagement like engaged to be married. I'm talking actually in more military terms, like engaging with the enemy. For the purposes of the SoL method, we will define engagement as the state of being personally responsible for how any other person shows up for you and how you show up for that person. This is the next level of the first foundational principle of the SoL method. And while it may sound a bit controlling, it is exactly the opposite. You cannot change or control people. All you can do is allow them to exist. Engagement is being personally responsible for how a person exists in your life and how you exist in the world. To all of you out there who know me on a personal level, you know I say often how I have no bad relationships. I enjoy everyone in my life, and this is how I do it. While we cannot change or control other people, you'd be surprised at how much we can control and change how people show up in our lives. Here's some questions to ask yourself about this topic. When you see other adults in your life, do you see them as fully grown, big boys and big girls that are fully capable of living their own lives and finding joy and success for themselves? Do you see your spouse or partner as a fully grown adult who is capable of taking care of him or herself? Do you see your children as completely capable of age-appropriate activities, emotional regulation, and conversation? Now, here's some more specific ways to look at this. When you walk into your best friend's messy house, do you feel the urge to clean it up for her because in your mind she, quote, can't get her act together? When your brother calls you to tell you about how his latest girlfriend dumped him, do you see him as someone who is terminally on the dating scene and unable to settle down? Now, at this point, don't let your ego take over. I can already hear half of the voices in your heads saying, but she legit can't clean up. Or, but he's a hot mess in every relationship. Look at the proof. I'm not asking you what history has shown about a person. I'm asking you how you see them in this moment, right now, regardless of the past. One of the most important things my coach ever told me is this: you and everyone around you is choosing to be exactly where you are. The BFF is choosing to have a messy house, and your brother is choosing to not deal with his relationship issues. Either one of them at any point could choose something different because they are grown-ass adults, just like you and me. Now, some people have said that my ability to have pity for others is little to none, and I will not disagree. I've been called harsh, a bitch, a cunt, unemotional, and everything in between. So, if you're looking for pity or to talk in circles about how you're a victim to an awful life, you're barking up the wrong tree. I do not create a safe space for other people to slather themselves in their own issues. I do create a safe space for personal responsibility and growth. There is a big difference between the two, and I really encourage you to do the same. In the first, you allow everyone in your life to stay exactly where they are. In the second, you create a place for them to grow because you see them as a bigger, better, and more capable version of themselves. So, what are you telling yourself about the people in your life? Do you tell yourself they're just as capable as you are? Do you tell yourself they're grown-ass adults who can create anything they want for their future? The reason it's so important to identify what we believe about the people in our lives is because it's impossible for anyone to show up outside of those beliefs. For example, until I dealt with those underlying emotions in my relationship with my mom, it was impossible for her to do anything or say anything that would not have resulted in me feeling judged or defensive. Remember, the way you feel in a relationship with someone else is 100% your responsibility to deal with and completely independent of the other person's actions. Okay, I am fully aware that this is an extremely counterculture thing to say, as we are in a world right now that is rampant with unhealthy states of victim mentality and codependency that are masked as progressive thinking. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. And if you have a reaction to this, go ahead and send me a message. I really am happy to discuss this with you further. Here's a general statement I've heard in our culture a lot in the past 5 years. Quote, from women to men. Men, you need to treat us with respect so we feel worthy and can be equals in society. Oh, goddess. Honestly, ladies, here's a statement you may not want to hear. I don't believe feminism exists. I also don't believe racism, personal boundaries, underrepresentation, minority groups, misogynism, or any other right or left situation that separates one group from another actually exists. Because all of these things are based in fear and separation, I believe these are all tiny, mad ideas of our egos. I believe all these words are code that we have created for the mass population experience of cultural codependency. Cultural codependency is the mass belief system and state of living in the majority of people in a culture in which one group has agreed to show up a certain way in society in reaction to the emotions and or actions of another group of people. Okay, I know that's a lot, and I'm going to say it again. Cultural codependency is the mass belief system or state of being of the majority of people in a country or culture in which one identified group of people has agreed to show up a certain way in society in reaction to the emotions and or actions of another identified group of people. Now, am I saying that genuine harm has not been done by these cultural codependent belief systems? Absolutely not. So please, right now, do not twist what I'm saying. I'm not saying that people have not been horribly mistreated due to their gender or color of their skin. The egos of the American people have a long history of using any excuse we can to create dividing lines between us based on skin color, sexual orientation, gender, financial class, age, religious beliefs, political status, and everything in between. Honestly, the only thing I haven't found yet is a separation between people who are right-handed and left-handed. Although I am kind of waiting for us left-handers to start a revolt and decide to be incredibly offended that the world isn't set up for us. I'm kind of kidding and kind of not. Either way, our egos love separation like this, as it is based in fear and, even better, often completely justified by the people around us. So, not only do we get to talk dirty about the crazy liberals or conservative stiffs, we get to feel right about it because everyone around us is doing the same thing. What I am saying is that we are now in a culture where, instead of taking responsibility for and owning these belief systems so we can change them, we are taught to play victim to them and ask everyone around us to treat us a certain way because of them. Here are some ways that you can use to be able to discern if a public movement or belief system is actually based in cultural codependency. Number one, does this belief create separation and division between people, or does it focus on a shared human experience? Number two, does it place the personal responsibility away from you or in your hands? Another way of saying this is, does it blame a particular group of people for all of the wrongs associated with this belief? Or does it create an experience where we can all engage in change? Number 3, is it dehumanizing? What I mean by this is, does it take away somebody else's human experience by painting them in a picture of black and white, rather than a human who has many shades of gray and many emotional experiences of their own? These are all 3 really good things to ask yourself about the culture and belief systems that you are engaging in your day-to-day life. Here's an example of this that is really relevant because at the time of recording this podcast, we are quickly moving into election season. Now, I'm sure you, just like anybody else who owns a television or a computer, has seen different advertisements for different political candidates. A lot of these advertisements take the form of Mr. So-and-so. He did X, Y, and Z wrong. Look at his horrible history of who he associates with. Look at how he can't do X, Y, and Z for you. This person is wrong for America. And then the music magically changes in the advertisement, and out walks the opposing candidate, now in beautiful Technicolor. Let's look at this woman who is amazing for America because she does all these amazing things. She has a history of doing X, Y, and Z, and she's committed to you. Vote for her. And then the commercial will end. Honestly, anytime these types of commercials come on my YouTube or the TV, I roll my eyes. And a part of me knows that I would struggle to vote for this person. Why? Because that conversation has zero personal responsibility reflected in it. That conversation depicted by that commercial depicts a black and white situation that is based in separation and dehumanizing. The person who puts out a commercial that says, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. I see all of X, Y, and Z that I'm concerned about in our society today. I take full responsibility for how me and my party have engaged in creating that situation. And here's my plan for how we can change it." That person will get my vote because that person is not only taking personal responsibility for the situation, they are laying out a program for change that has nothing to do with anybody else. Okay, I will get off this tangent. Back to my example of men needing to treat women a certain way so we feel worthy and blah, 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 blah. I really hope at this point, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the codependency that is littered in that statement. When we as a female gender have completely dealt with ourselves and taken personal responsibility for how we have allowed ourselves to show up in the world over the past several hundred years, we won't need men, children, or the goddamn dogs to treat us a certain way because we will already have filled that worthiness bucket ourselves. When your bucket of love and worthiness is full, you don't engage in jobs that don't pay you what you want. You don't stay in marriages that are abusive. You don't converse in conversations that say blondes are dumb, and you don't associate with people who have beliefs around what a woman's place is or isn't. For example, I don't need to change the men or women or animals at the zoo, for that matter, that are committed to the belief that all women should be housewives. I simply don't engage with them because I'm too busy creating my own solutions outside of the box that they live in. Women, When we say men need to do certain things so we feel worthy or respected, we are essentially saying, I'm unwilling to be responsible for myself, so I need you to be responsible for me. What are we, children? Guess who this gives all the power to? I'll tell you, it's not us. Okay, now I get that there have been times in the history of the human race where it would not have been as accessible to women to not engage in these things as it is today. 100 years ago, it would have been way more challenging for a woman to not take a job because it paid less than what a man is paid. I get that. However, if you really look at history, there are always people who have stepped out of the cultural belief system of the time. 100, 200, and 300 years ago, there were successful female entrepreneurs, not because it was easy or because the culture was supportive at the time, but because these women refused to engage in a situation that was out of alignment with their own sense of worthiness. Now, I am very aware that on the surface, I am a Caucasian woman living in suburban America, in a nice home with 2 beautiful children and a supportive family. I've had the opportunity to receive a good education all the way through college, study dance for 20 years, and travel to several parts of the States as well as overseas. To some people listening, I know it seems like I hit the genetic jackpot. I get that. Here's what most of you don't know. I was molested at the age of 4 and struggled for years with my own sexuality because that experience was so traumatic for me, I didn't mentally remember it until I was in my 20s. My mother was in and out of the psychiatric hospital while I was growing up due to her own troubled childhood, which greatly impacted both my relationship with her as well as with my grandparents. I mentioned in a previous episode that I spent several years in high school with an eating disorder due to my own inability to process what was going on around me. When my parents divorced when I was a young adult, it took me years to develop a relationship with my father and sister after that. Now, I could go on, but I bet you could too. Whether you fit into one of these underrepresented or minority groups or not, we all have a past because we are all human. Here's the point. If the story you tell yourself about you is the story of victimhood because of your childhood, your gender, your skin color, if you were popular in school, if you went to church on Sundays, etc., you will never be able to escape these things that you say you hate. These beliefs and stories you write about yourself are the only way you can show up in other people's lives, and the only way other people can show up in yours. Deal with yourself, and you will no longer be the victim to any of these isms, as I call them. You will just be you, human like everyone else. And then everyone around you has the rare opportunity to show up just as human in your life. Not as the story they tell themselves even, but as a greater, better version than they can even imagine. Did you know that as children, we don't actually see skin color? I've tested this with my 4-year-old daughter and her friends at preschool. We don't see gender. We don't see religion. We don't see any of the dividing lines we see as adults. We don't see them because our egos aren't fully engaged yet. When children make friends with other children, all they see are other kids. I want you to really ask yourself, what story do you tell you about you? Who are you? What do you see when you look at the other people in your life? This is why I believe this work is so important and, honestly, the key to changing the divided world that we live in today. The world will not change until we change. We cannot change as individuals until we are willing to take personal responsibility, first for ourselves and then for how we engage with others. Back to the first purpose of step 3, banishing resentment in all of your relationships through proper engagement. When you engage from a clean place, no victim stories or emotional trauma of your own, and you see every other adult as capable of doing the same thing, you can use 2 amazing and fantastic words with grace, ease, and authenticity. Yes and no. Your authentic yes and authentic no are the 2 best ways you can love someone. When you're in a clean place, you say yes and no authentically. You no longer overcommit or say yes when you mean to say no, or no when you mean to say yes. Have you ever been there? This could be from a really simple example, like your friend asks you to go see a movie that you don't really want to see, but because you're not emotionally clean and you're hanging on to a lot of abandonment issues that you experienced out of your friends not including you in elementary school, you say, "Oh, sure, I'll go with you. That sounds like fun." This can also be reflected in a much more life-impacting situation, like I shared with you when I shared my story. How I said yes every step of the way for 10 years when I should have said no. When you're in a clean place and you say yes and no from an authentic place, you release any guilt, shame, or fear because you release your need to be responsible for how anyone will react. Now, there will be times, like I mentioned earlier, where the person talking to has not been doing this work and is not in the same place as you. I'll repeat here that you are not responsible for how anyone reacts to your authentic yes or authentic no, and you are not responsible for any emotions that they have. Their reactions are none of your business. If someone you care about has a big reaction to your yes or no, and you want to lean into that conversation, absolutely go for it. This is what we're going to cover at length in the next episode. However, if the emotional reaction is out of codependency, for example, I need you to say yes so I can feel better, you can kindly still say yes or no while creating emotional space for that person. Now, time for that example I mentioned with Blake. Here's a great example of a conversation where I had the opportunity to create a lot of resentment in my relationship with Blake, but I didn't. Blake is also a prime example of someone in my life who is sometimes very committed to being a victim, while other times interested in taking personal responsibility. So, here's what happened. It's Easter morning. I get a phone call. It's Blake. I say, "Happy Easter." She says, "I can't believe what's happening to me." Oh boy. Banana is already happening in my head. "What's up?" I ask. She tells me about how the father of her son let him only eat Easter candy for breakfast. And now he's going to crash and burn on my holiday with him. To be honest, I resisted the urge to laugh. "You're upset that he ate Easter candy on Easter? Why are you upset about it?" I ask. He knew what he was doing to me. They did this on purpose, just to mess with my day. Her voice goes up. Banana! I take a deep breath. It sounds to me that your son had a great Easter morning with his dad, Blake. Are you open to a conversation where it might not be all about you? Maybe his dad really wanted him to have a great holiday morning. You don't know him like I do. He knew I was going to have him the rest of the day, and he did this on purpose. Okay, got it. Is your son acting out in any way? No, but you don't understand what I'm saying. At this, I sighed. And here was the moment of truth. I knew at that point that she wasn't interested in taking personal responsibility or engaging in a conversation that involved a solution. She was in the place of wanting to make it all about her. In this moment, we all have a choice. I could say yes to that conversation and essentially choose to create resentment in that relationship because I would have wound up on the phone far longer than I wanted to be and ended up feeling frustrated and feeling very defensive. Or I had the opportunity to do exactly what I did. I answered her, honestly, I don't understand what you're saying, Blake. It sounds like your son's dad wanted him to have a fun Easter morning and do the Easter candy thing like every other kid I know right now. If you're committed to being angry about him acting out, which isn't actually happening, and making this all about you, then I'm just not really interested in that conversation. You don't get it. He did this to me on purpose. Yep, I don't understand your mindset, Blake. I love you, though, and I hope you have an awesome day with your son. I'll talk to you soon. And I hung up the phone. Now, that situation may sound really bold to you, but let me ask you this. When's the last time you wanted to leave a conversation but felt like you couldn't? When's the last time you started to be seriously annoyed with someone you were talking to but weren't able to shift the topic or simply say, no thanks? Take note of how I didn't judge Blake in any way, and I had no emotional reaction to her. I simply conveyed the truth, my authentic no, that I wasn't interested in that conversation, and I ended it. Most of us over-engage with people, or we flirt with ending something, but we don't actually do it. That is to say, we say yes when we should say no, or we threaten to say no, but actually stay in the conversation and say yes. When we do this, we are saying yes to resentment. All that irritation and frustration you feel when you're in a conversation you no longer want to be a part of because you've stayed far longer than you should have and over-engaged. That's resentment. It's time to stop the madness. I have homework for you. Assuming you've started the tapping work to process through emotional traumas and triggers, I want you to practice saying no in conversations from a clean place. Most of us are very good at saying yes, but no is equally, if not more, important. This isn't an angry or defensive no. This is just no thanks. I want you to practice saying that in any conversation you have in the next week where you start to feel irritated, frustrated, or agitated. The moment you begin to think, here we go again, when your girlfriend launches in on her latest bit of gossip, simply say, no thanks, and excuse yourself so you can go and deal with any emotions that interaction brought up for you. You're going to find out a little secret that I've learned over the past few years. Your relationships are far less fragile than you think they are. And the more authentic you show up, the deeper the roots of those relationships will go. If you're committed to this work, if you're committed to loving everyone in your life so much that you are unwilling to let resentment grow in these relationships, saying yes and no when you need to is how you make this happen. There isn't a relationship or a situation in your life that shouldn't be carefully crafted by you. When you aren't responsible for crafting it, it will, by default, go to the largest frequency in the room, which is often the frequency harboring the most emotional trauma. When you are emotionally at zero, you can set the tone for the room and the conversation you are a part of. When you're at zero, you're in control. Say no authentically. Stay emotionally at zero. Create relationships in only the way that you genuinely enjoy each and every one of them. As we bring this episode to a close, I know we covered a lot, and I'm very aware that I touched on some topics that might have brought up a lot of emotional triggers of your own. I get that, and that's okay. I want everyone out there listening to know that I really am a safe place. Go ahead and send me a message. I will engage in all of these conversations as long as you are also interested in taking personal responsibility. All that being said, like I promised, in the next episode, we are going to tackle the next part of step 3, which is where I teach you how to lean in and be curious with the people in your life so you can foster deep and healthy relationships with everyone around you. All of that being said, thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic.